Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, yesterday we did our first upload on the West murders, talking about Fred and Rose West from across the pond and in the United Kingdom. This was actually suggested to us from one of our users, so if anybody has any other suggestions about cases that they would like to hear on this channel, please drop a comment below. I might have said suggested from one of our users. I meant viewers. Users, that sounds more like using drugs or something. Yeah, no, sorry about that. A little bit tongue-tied. But yeah, if you have any suggestions for cases you would like covered on this channel, please drop something in the comments below. Let's talk about Fred West. There were some very horrific murders that happened, in the United Kingdom. Moorcourt Farm, 25 Cromwell Street, some new place names for me that sound just absolutely horrific. We're dealing with at least 9 females that were murdered very, very brutally, including Fred West's own daughter, as well as his stepdaughter Charmaine and his first wife, Catherine Costello. And then he incorporated, of course, his wife Rose into this. And I believe it was Rose West who actually committed the murder of Charmaine West on her, unaided. But, of course, they were all part of this team. This is something, though, that has really sparked something. We've talked about the nature versus nurture aspects of this yesterday, and I was just watching the Born to Kill episode about Fred West, and that's pretty much what they were just breaking down. They were just like, nature versus nurture, what's going on? They're not using the exact words, but that's the angle that they're playing with this. Like, how did this happen? How does somebody grow up and go on to commit such brutal and heinous murders? Fred West is somebody that a lot of people really want to focus in on his childhood. That's how this Born to Kill episode begins with. When I first began reading about the Fred West murders, I immediately was caught by the things in his childhood. Physical abuse, his mother's talking about bestiality. I mean, absolutely horrendous conditions growing up. And in the Born to Kill episode, they have this psychologist who is also saying that he believes that the witnessing the slaughter of animals as a kid could be something destructive that would have impacted Fred's mental state. I can't really say too much about that. I mean, I've heard, of course, many other people talk about growing up on farms. I mean, I listen to this one radio host who grew up on a farm, and he talks about that stuff, and he doesn't seem like he has killed anyone, not to my knowledge anyway. So once again, it's like, I don't necessarily know how big that would have been a factor, like witnessing the slaughter of animals or participating in it. I don't know how that would actually lead to these negative consequences. I think the abuse would definitely be a much larger factor. In the past on this channel, I think it was during the Braulio Castillo case, we talked about Dr. Ramani Daravusala. She's kind of I guess you'd say, a YouTube doctor, and she talks about the differences between psychopath, sociopath, and narcissist. And what she describes as a psychopath is somebody who is to born without any sort of sense of a moral compass, a conscience. They don't have any sort of, functioning ability. They're just blank on the inside, and they create this kind of fictitious outer persona that is usually very charming and very charismatic, and they're just like cool as a cucumber during all situations. Is that what Fred West is? Is he a psychopath? Well, we had one guy in the film, the same guy who was talking about the mental state and being affected by animals. The psychologist there is saying, yes, Fred West was just born to kill. It was in his DNA. But does that make him a psychopath? I really noticed some very odd anomalies that they mentioned in this Born to Kill episode. They talked about how Fred West had an IQ of 80. They say that he was barely literate. He left school at 14. He was a builder, but he was actually a very good builder. He made some very, very intricate designs for his home, some very well, structured extensions that he had built for the home himself. And it's like, he didn't want the police to find the bodies of his victims, other than 2 of them. He alerted them to 2 of them because he didn't want them to demolish his home. He didn't want them to tear the home apart because he had built it himself, and he was very proud of that. And that doesn't sound like someone who is blank and has no emotions. That doesn't sound like somebody who is, not feeling anything. It sounds like he is very full of himself and very proud of his own work, and, or even the whole concept of, they talk about how when Fred West would bury the bodies, he would want to know where they are. It's like he just wants to, it's another form of control. So this almost sounds like it's going down something more along the lines of narcissistic, but leading to destructive consequences. Once again, he's showing an enormous amount of passion for the work that he has done, not only building, but also the more destructive actions. But it's like he seems to have some sort of sense of feeling. He's not somebody who's blank on the inside and just created this exterior fake persona. It seems like he has some type of genuine feeling on the inside, but he still created this exterior persona all the same. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, but I mean, I've even mentioned a few things in the past. It's like these criminal types, these guys who are like really going after women, sexual predators, I guess you would call them. Frequent sexual predators are usually very charming. They are usually very charismatic. And I was actually listening to an interview with Lyndon Lafferty, years ago. I mean, we're talking maybe 8 years ago now. And he was just sort of talking about how sometimes, those criminals can get people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. Like, get into somebody's car and give them a ride when they wouldn't normally do that. Like, the average person would be much more cautious. But absolutely, Fred West is somebody like that. He would have had the ability to get somebody to go for a ride with him when he would be a total stranger. He had that sort of convincing personality. His neighbors described him as a very comical individual. You wouldn't have noticed anything about him, and you can hear the audio recordings from Fred West, and during his, like, I guess you'd call it the deposition, you can hear his conquest, we should say, should be the word. But there were some things that I noticed in this one, very particularly. They had an interview with Caroline Owens, and she was someone who was, taken, actually abducted by the West, by Fred and Rose West. And she actually gives the kind of experience about what it's like. And I think this is one of the most highlighting things associated with the Fred West murders because, of course, Caroline Owens wasn't murdered. She was able to get away mostly unharmed, but she was attacked. I shouldn't say mostly unharmed because she was attacked, but it's like, but the thing is, they were just hit with 25-pound fines. Fred and Rose West were just hit with 25-pound fines for the attack. Caroline was too afraid to come forward. So that's kind of how these people slip through the system. And I definitely believe that that would have contributed something to the case. This whole notion of, we tried to abduct somebody and all we're getting hit for is a small fine. Yeah, that kind of sends the message to society that you can slip through the cracks. Not only Fred and Rose West, but to everybody. And it's like, this is kind of something that we talked about in part one of these uploads, where it's like, it's talking about how people slip through the cracks, about how people learn how to evade the system, and I definitely think somebody like Fred West would be very much aware of that, where they would know how to, they would be studying this, they would be learning this, like, how can we do things without getting caught? But, I thought it was very, I thought it was actually kind of tasteful at the end of this Born to Kill episode, where they kind of listed all the victims of the Fred West murders one by one, even for that small moment where it's like, they're just giving some sort of recognition to the victims, not only to, the heinous murderers, but to, like, the people who are actually affected by this. And, Fred Goldman said this very clearly during, the trial of O.J. Simpson for Nicole Brown and his son Ron Goldman. He was just like, they never mentioned their names enough. They didn't show any photos of them. It was just like they weren't, being respectful to the victims. We have to always recognize that our focus often tends to be on the murderers, but the victims, are much more important, to be honest, because they didn't deserve, these sort of heinous, brutal acts of some disgusting predator. And it is disgusting. It's like, I mean, I think that the reason though that this case becomes so fascinating is people really just want to know, like, is society doing this to people, or are people just born this way? And the conclusion that they said at Born to Kill was that Fred West was born to be a murderer no matter what. But we talked about all of the major signs of a serial killer, such as harming animals, and I believe starting fires was something that he did. But Fred West also had major brain injuries. I mean, I talked about this yesterday. They re-highlighted it in Born to Kill. They were like, he had a motorcycle accident. He fell out of a window and hit his head. Injury to the prefrontal cortex, the parts of the brain that deal with personality. All of these things are like, it's just it's a doomed situation. But at the same time, though, that definition of a psychopath or a sociopath, someone who isn't feeling anything on the inside, it seems like he had a lot of feeling, because when he went to court, Rose West refused to embrace him. He saw Rose West in court for the first time since their arrest. She refused to embrace him, and then, like, they said his confidence just flooded on out. And it was just like he didn't have any confident aura that he could push out over the courtroom. And that tells me that this guy is feeling something. I mean, if he actually met that definition of, a psychopath, then he would have just been blank and he wouldn't have cared at all. But yeah, so I don't really think that he is, he falls into that sort of psychopathic category based on purely on the definition that I've heard from one YouTube medical doctor. So it's like, when you also want to examine this, we talked about narcissism, which, narcissists, if I understand, they can feel things that are public. They feel public emotions like shame, guilt. They feel things like embarrassment, and it definitely seems like those things were present. But at the same time, their emotions are kind of much more focused on selfish reasons, selfish motivations, selfish desires, and yeah, that's Fred West, and he became very, very aggressive in his early years. I believe that was following the motorcycle accident, like, cause after he had his nose broken, and he was, for a time it seemed like he was somewhat, I don't want to say disfigured, but I can't think of another word to describe it. So when that happened, then he developed a much more aggressive approach toward women, because it was a way to cope with, not being so physically attractive. But of course, I mean, his injuries healed, and you wouldn't really look at any photos of Fred West in his adulthood and think that he was disfigured. But at the same time, they think that that's another contributing element. It's like slowly he became more and more aggressive outside. And, just this is one of those things where it's like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. This is a Murphy's Law for society. And, some people like Fred West seem to exist. Absolutely heinous murders. And, it's like they demolished the house completely, 25 Cromwell Street, where he was living, and they showed Caroline Owens presenting it, where it's now just a footpath. It's just like it's not a memorial garden like they planned. It's just a path that you can walk on, and it's like this is just a nasty case. But I think there's still a little bit more to the story. This Born to Kill episode didn't talk too much about prostitution, but we know that Fred tried to get started in kind of the pimp/brothel business, and that could have also, been a contributing factor to this destructive outcome, where it's like it's just a repetitive cycle of destructive behaviors. And we had somebody who was evading law enforcement. It's like he abducted somebody, tied her up, put tape over her mouth. They're driving her in the back seat of the car, and they get 25-pound fines for it. And it's like, that doesn't really seem like, you're sending a good message to society. And at the same time, though, when someone just has that kind of innocent, charismatic effect, they're able to avoid capture. They're able to talk their way out of a lot of situations. They are able to do that. We know this very clearly. We talked about this last time. These things happen all over the world. We gave examples from Hong Kong and South Africa and the United States, of course. These types of characters exist, and they're horrible. But I think we're going to keep exploring this mystery a little bit more. And the mystery really here is to know, like, what really is going on, like, what factors in society allow this stuff to happen. Once again, just to recap, I'm a little bit skeptical about kind of like the tying in things like, seeing animals slaughtered as a kid. I don't really know completely how that would have affected his mental state. I mean, the concept of being performing bestiality on animals as a teenager, I think that might have contributed a little bit more. Then we would also have something such as head injuries, as well as the kind of errors that in law enforcement that happened when people didn't act when they could have. I mean, those are just things as well, like that we see from countless cases all across the world where someone comes forward and then there either is not enough evidence to convict, there isn't enough, evidence to hold somebody. We see this from Alexander Pichushkin in Russia, where he tried to murder someone and throw her body into a sewer drain, but she was able to crawl out of it, went to the police, and nothing happened. And we just told the story of Caroline Owens today. It's like, I mean, these things happened all over the world, and I don't know, there's something going on in humanity, and we're going to try and find out what it is. Well, that's all for now. Until next time.